Hello everyone and welcome to Dutchgreybeard. When I started this channel, I did as most booktubers and made a video of what I'd read every month. Turns out I read way too slow for that to be interesting. After doing 4 of these monthly wrap-ups and one where I combined 3 months of reading into one video, I changed the sequence from a monthly thing to X days of reading. The number of days is random. Whenever I feel that I've read enough books to make an interesting video, then that's how many days I will look backwards. Initially, I called these videos X days of reading, which sounds rather dull really. From now on, I will call my reading wrap-up videos The Treasures of Reading. And this is episode 5. So with that little rebranding intro out of the way, let's dive into my reading wrap-up over the last 81 days, starting at March 31 and ending on June 20. During that period, I read 7 books with a total page count of 3,508 and I DNF'd 1, which is very unusual for me to do. The average score of the 7 books is a high 89.7 points out of 100, which compares to 4.5 stars. Not many books, but the quality was very high indeed. I blame a reading slump and work for these modest numbers. The first few weeks of April were not the best of this year for me. Without really understanding how or why, reading a book was the last thing on my mind. These things simply happen, as well as deadline peaks regarding my work. They are also recurring, and during these periods 3-4 days or even a whole week can go by without me picking up a book. At the end of the day, I'm either still working or completely spent. This is not meant as an excuse or anything, it's just to clarify why I haven't read so many books these past 80 plus days. This chart gives you an overview of what I've read and when I read it. For 4 of these books I've already made a separate video, which I will link down below in the description. Let us start by getting my first DNF of the year out of the way. It is the first volume of a series of 6 called Life and Teaching of the Masters of the East by Baird Spalding. Sometimes I get inspired by one of the spiritual books my wife reads. Most of the time that is a direct hit for me as well, only this time it was a complete miss. This book was originally published in 1924 and it tells the story of a Western man who is part of a research party that visits the Himalayas. In a very irritating and haughty writing style, the author tries to convince the reader of the miraculous powers of the people he meets, and Jesus and Christianity is all over the place. Very edifying and not credible. So after about 50 pages I put the book down. Nothing wrong with Jesus or Christianity, but when a writer tries too hard to convince me of something, I get out. It was really disappointing because I'd been looking very much forward to this whole series. The next book is a novel by a Dutch writer who is an automatic author for me. Stad van de Honden by Leon de Winter, which translates as City of the Dogs. His previous novel was okay at best, but this one is simply a masterpiece. I have not done a reading experience on this book because of it being a Dutch book, so I want to spend a few extra minutes on it over here. It is only 206 pages, but there is a lot going on in these pages. The story is about Jaap Hollander. He's a renowned brain surgeon who agrees to perform an operation on the daughter of a very important and influential leader of a country in the Middle East. The girl, Nora, has what in medical terms is called arteriovenous malformation, if I pronounce that rightly. This means abnormally connected arteries. When this occurs within the brains, it can become life-threatening. This particular case is extremely complex and surgery is almost certain to fail. Still, Jaap Hollander takes on this assignment. Perhaps because Nora has the same age as his own daughter when she had gone missing 10 years ago. The book has many threads and interconnections that not only make this into a thrilling read, but also very profound in scope and meaning. I will keep this short introduction to this book spoiler-free, because there are some Dutch people following this channel. But what I can tell you is that after the surgery, Jaap gets sucked into a surrealistic world where a dog talks to him. This dog helps him to find the location where Jaap's daughter disappeared 10 years ago. Stad van de Honden is a beautiful novel with rich and poetic prose. Like after Jaap's meeting with a very important world leader who is involved in a huge political change for the better with Nora's father, there is this line, first in Dutch. Het was niet zo moeilijk om de afgelopen uren te laten vervluchtigen tot een dagdroom, tot een curieus en misschien wel amusant huppelpasje van zijn verbeelding. Which in English means, it wasn't that hard to let the past few hours fade into a daydream, a curious and perhaps amusing little hopstep of his imagination. It is a very gripping and emotional story. Everything gets explained in the end, and all the pieces fit together. There is a good reason why Leon de Winter is one of my automatic authors. I gave Stad van de Honden 96 points out of 100. My next read was The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, the first book in the Gentleman Bastard series. This was a buddy read with BJ Minton, one of the friends of this channel. You can check out my separate video over here. The book is 722 pages long, and just after starting this read, I sunk into a reading slump. I very much enjoyed this book, better than BJ did. Still, it took me 24 days to read it. The prose of Scott Lynch is very impressive. He can make poetry of the most gory and horrific scenes, which are abundantly present in this book. Somehow, none of the characters stood out for me, although Locke himself managed to become a favorite of mine in the end. The story deepens as the book progresses, and the initial con turns into something much greater. I gave this book 91 points out of 100, and I'm looking forward to picking up the 2 sequels that have been published so far in this unfinished series. I then returned to Brandon Sanderson with Warbreaker. This is my 6th Sanderson read, if I also count The Emperor's Soul. It took me 10 days to read the 656 pages, and it was a great experience. Here you'll find my separate video. As can be expected with Sanderson, the magic system is worked out in detail, and it is very captivating. I've met one of my favorite characters of all time, Lightsong, the god who himself doesn't believe he is a god. This results in some hilarious dialogues with his own high priest and others. It was very hard to put this book down. From the first page to the last, this story enthralled me, and the reappearance of Hoyt, this time as a master storyteller, makes me all the more curious to the Cosmere. Because up until this point, I only know of the existence of this great universe because of other booktubers. I rated Warbreaker 93 points out of 100, and I cannot wait to start with The Way of Kings. After Warbreaker, I read the book that just may well become my book of the year, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. In just 3 sittings, I finished this small book of 247 pages. This book is proof that the amount of pages is not always an advantage. Check out my spoiler-filled video on this book over here. I won't spoil anything here, of course. This mystery/fantasy/literary fiction/surrealistic and allegorical book is just amazingly well written. Every time when I think back on this book, I discover something new about what it might mean, about the plot twists, and about the role some of the characters play. If any comparison with food holds up, I would compare this book with a dish that has truffle in it. The dish itself is amazing while you're eating it, but the wonderful taste of the truffle stays in your mouth at least a whole day. Her first book, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, is now on my TBR, and I just found out that a new short story of hers will be published in October this year. The title of that is very intriguing: The Wood at Midwinter. Piranesi scored 98 points out of 100, which in my eyes is near to perfect. My next read didn't score the highest points, but it definitely was my most important read this past period. A Memory of Light is the final book in the Wheel of Time. I started reading this series in January 2023, and these are the books that transformed me from a reader of literature into a reader of fantasy. As I mentioned in the reading vlog I made of this reading experience, there is way too much war and battle in this book. But at the same time, it is amazing to wrap up so many threads that have been spun throughout these 15 books. I read A Memory of Light in the second half of May, 18 days for 1,008 pages. Amidst the overdose of war tactics and the relentless slaughtering on both sides of the dark and the light, there is much beauty, funny moments, tender scenes, bravery, sad losses, and much wisdom. People who follow my channel know of my love for the British author William Horwood. His trilogy, The Duncton Chronicles, has been my undisputed number one for as long as I can remember. But I wouldn't be surprised if The Wheel of Time will take first place the next time I do my top 10 of best fantasy series. Stay tuned for that one. I gave A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson 93 points out of 100. For the next two books, I haven't yet made a separate video. The first is the second book in Terry Pratchett's Discworld, The Light Fantastic. I liked his first book, The Colour of Magic, although it wasn't a very cohesive story, to say the least. This one is much more of a story that holds up, and also the humour was much better in my opinion. I read this book as a sort of counterbalance for the last Wheel of Time book. At some points I had to get away from all the massacring and bloody slaughtering. Here are a few snippets of my footage that didn't make the final cut of my video about A Memory of Light. Together with A Memory of Light, I started reading the second book in the Discworld by Terry Pratchett, The Light Fantastic. Also just a few pages in, I'm at page 19, so nothing much to say about this, but I did pick up The Light Fantastic, other than I anticipated at the beginning. This book, I read about 100 pages since the last time. This book is the perfect counterbalance for something as serious and almost depressing as The Wheel of Time. This is exactly the opposite. And I must say, but I'll do a different review on this one, I must say I believe that this book, The Light Fantastic, is really drawing me into the Discworld. Of course, I've been reading the Tiffany Aching sequence and loving it, but the Discworld as a series, this book does it to me. I laughed tears. The appearance of Kohan, what's he called? Kohan the Barbarian. This is so immensely funny. I laughed so much yesterday. Was it yesterday? I think it was yesterday. And thinking back on it, I have to laugh again. I could not tell you the scenes without bursting into laughter again. So, what I'm trying to say is this is the perfect counterbalance for A Memory of Light. Can't wait to get on with number 3, Equal Rights. This book scored 74 points out of 100, which is very close to 4 stars. The final book of this Treasures of Reading episode is another buddy read I did with BJ Minton, Red Rising by Pierce Brown. The first book in the series that is supposed to be 7 books altogether, if I'm not mistaken. There is much I want to say about this book and its author, but I'll rein myself in. A separate video is in the making. In short, I liked the first 2/3 of the book at best, and I loved the final third. The story starts off great with our main character, Darrow, living his harsh life in the mines of Mars. After really heartbreaking events, he finds himself confronted with a completely new life. Up until there, the plot is clear and maybe even predictable. But then it is as if the main story is abandoned and we are dragged into this other story, which is a little bit tedious, to be honest. It has the same protagonist, but I wasn't invested in the events of this second story. But into the final 100 pages, this story gets more depth and meaning, and I couldn't stop reading. So, this book has 2 faces for me. Still, the ending was so intriguing that I immediately started reading Golden Sun, the second book in the first trilogy. Loving it. I believe BJ has a similar experience as mine, although he is less complimentary than I am. I'm quite sure that I will read Morningstar, Book 3 in this trilogy, right after I finished reading Golden Sun. You could say that Red Rising was the starting motor for this engine to really get going. I gave Red Rising 83 points out of 100, still a very decent 4 stars. These past 81 days were slow reading days. With the holidays coming up, I'm not sure if that will change much. Of course, I want to read more than 100 books this year, but that is simply not realistic. I plan on going on a hiking vacation for about 4 weeks, and I'll probably won't be carrying any books with me, which means that I'll have to turn to audio. I'm now listening to the 3rd book in the already mentioned Dunton Chronicles. I've been listening to that for about 2 months now. I'm very slow with audio. And I have the 4 main Tolkien books waiting for me, starting with The Hobbit and the 3 volumes in The Lord of the Rings. These will also be rereads for me. But who knows what the future brings? Perhaps my body won't accept the physical hardship of walking many miles, carrying at least 17 kilograms of luggage on my back. If that's the case, I will be back home within a week. In that case, I've got 3 weeks of reading time at my hands. However things will turn out, you will know it when I publish my next episode of The Treasures of Reading. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutchgreybeard.